If you have ever heard a Muslim apologist or street preacher talk, you would have undoubtedly have heard them say that the Quran is a miracle, that nothing is like it, and that it is uncreated. The three most commonly repeated qualities of it are: it is the literal word of Allah, revealed to Muhammad, an illiterate non-believer. It is the final unaltered revelation from Allah, and that the Quran is eternal. It is universally applicable to anyone, anywhere, at any time. Let's take a look at each one of these points and test the strength of these claims. If Islam is true and a divine revelation from God, then surely we should only see the miraculous nature of the Quran on display. If you are a Muslim and cannot handle your beliefs being challenged, I suggest you look away now. To help us better understand the Islamic view of the Quran, I have created this graph to give us an overview of it, from the mouth of Allah to Muhammad and then to us. The bottom timeline shows us when it was first given up until the present time. We should be able to apply the teachings of the Quran right across it. If the Quran is a miracle, then we shouldn't have to add anything to this graph. 1. It is believed in Islam that the Quran is the literal word of God, that he revealed the Quran to Muhammad via the angel Jibril, or Gabriel, over a 23-year period. It is widely held and commonly preached that Muhammad was an illiterate, so he couldn't read or write, and that he was not a believer, let alone well taught in Judaism or Christianity. How could he then have written an entire book? Muslims appeal to Isaiah 29:12 as a prophecy of Muhammad.
And when they give the book to one who cannot read, saying, "Read this," he says, "I cannot read."
This verse, as claimed by Muslims, ties in with Surah al-Baqarah 3.
The angel came to him and asked him to read. The prophet replied, "I do not know how to read."
Firstly, the verse in Isaiah is definitely not one to appeal to if you want to show the prophecy of Muhammad in the Bible. The context of the verse shows that the one who cannot read cannot do so because the Lord has poured out upon you a spirit of a deep sleep that has closed your eyes and has covered your heads. This is about how none will be able to see the coming siege of Jerusalem. So unless Muslims are claiming that Muhammad is a blind prophet, then this verse doesn't work. According to Islamic tradition, Muhammad didn't read or scribe the Quran. Rather, it was verbally transmitted to him. He would memorize it and then recite it to scribes who would then write it down. So our first amendment to this graph is that Muhammad didn't read or write it, but rather he was merely a human voice recorder for the angel Jibril to pass the Quran onto the scribes who would then record it. Secondly, on this point, the Quran being the literal word of God has some interesting results. Muslims claim that Allah is the same as the Abrahamic God. This means that he is omniscient or all-knowing. But how can an all-knowing God think that the sun sets into a pool of mud like in Surah 18:86 tells us it does? Surah 86:7-8 tells us man is made from a fluid emerging from between the backbone and the ribs. What a strange inaccuracy for the Islamic God of creation to get wrong about his own creation. Surah 55:33 tells us that no one will be able to go into outer space. Surah 96:2 tells us that Allah also thinks that humans are made from a clot of blood, not an embryo as observed in nature. Allah also gets genealogy mixed up, thinking Mary, the mother of Christ, is also the sister of Aaron and the daughter of Amram. There is roughly 1,500 years between the time of Amram, Moses, and Aaron, and Mary, the mother of Jesus. How can an all-knowing God get something so basic so wrong? Well, the only explanation is that Muhammad confused Miriam, sister of Aaron, with Mary. This error becomes obvious when reading Surah 19. Here, Zechariah, father of John the Baptist, speaks with Allah about his wife Elizabeth becoming pregnant. Then it recounts the angel Gabriel appearing to Mary, then moving on to the mix-up. Clearly Allah has some catching up to do on science and biblical genealogy. An all-knowing God should really be all-knowing. So we make our second amendment to our graph, this time showing that Allah's knowledge was really limited to what 7th century Arab farmers believed about the world. 2. A miracle of the Quran, according to Muslims, is that it remains unchanged since the time it was given to Muhammad. This is heralded by Muslims as proof from Allah that Islam is the true religion on earth. The problem is, which version of the Quran is true? You see, Muslims will point to the many English translations of the Bible as an argument to its corruption. However, what many Muslims don't realize is that there are over 100 English translations of the Quran today. But worse, Arabic is meant to be the purest form that the Quran can be read or spoken in, and yet there are 31 versions of the Quran in Arabic. How is this possible? Well, when Muhammad recited the Quran to his scribes, each copy varied. These differences included recitation, wording, and dialect. So in the year 650, 20 years after Muhammad died, Uthman ibn Affan took it upon himself to eliminate the other versions and create a standard uniform version. These versions are called Aruf. There were 7, and 6 were destroyed. So, where does the 31 versions come from? Across Africa and the Middle East, there have been found versions of the Quran with differing texts. These are some of the Qurans that all vary from one another in text and message. For example, Surah 1:4 in Hafs version says that Allah is the only owner of the Day of Judgment. But in the Warsh version, it says that He is the King of the Day of Judgment. A slight variant that doesn't agree on what Allah is. The next is Surah 2:10. Hafs says of non-believers that they lie, and in the Warsh version, it says that they accuse others of lying. Another variant, do non-believers lie or do they accuse others of lying? Who knows? Surah 2:140 doesn't know who is saying that Christians and Jews are the descendants of Abraham. Is it you or is it others? This is not where it stops. There are 31 variants, all with differing choice in words, punctuation, and meaning.
Even if they burnt all the Qurans, it wouldn't affect us at all, in the sense that, the Quran has been memorized by so many millions of people that we can easily recreate it the same day, right? You can take all the Quran from us, all the Qurans, all the copies of the Quran, you can take them all from us, and we'll be fine, right? We're not like the nations before us.
Even if you burned every Quran on earth, we will bring it back, cover to cover, page for page, letter for letter, every single word.
The repeated statement by Muslims that if every physical copy of the Quran was to vanish, it could easily be replicated because millions of Muslims have committed it to memory is just not true. Which recitation will get printed, and who would be the arbiter to decide? In reality, there would still be variants and disagreements on text and interpretation. Uthman ibn Affan would roll in his grave. So here we need to make multiple amendments to our graph showing that the variants of the Quran when it was first penned and the variants that exist today across the world. Even if there was just one version that differed from the rest, this would still debunk the miracle of the Quran's preservation. But since we know that there were at least 7 Arufs in Muhammad's time and that there are 31 Arabic versions, we can say with absolute certainty that the Quran is not immune to corruption. Third and finally, the Quran is eternal and timeless. It is universal and it is applicable to anyone, anywhere, at any time. If your name is Muhammad and live in the 7th century and feel sexual urges towards your son's wife, then the Quran is definitely of benefit as Allah inexplicably decides that marrying your daughter-in-law is permissible. How is this applicable to your life? Who knows? The Quran is not a detailed explanation of all things. If you are a slave owner and desire one of your slave girls, you are allowed to take her. This is a universal timeless law that is applicable in our day according to Islam. Except slavery is banned in many countries, as is the practice of forced marriage. It is still socially acceptable if you live in one of the countries that practice primitive living though, and allow for archaic laws such as child marriage. Funnily enough though, if you are a Muslim, the Quran does give guidance on fasting during Ramadan. But if you are unfortunate enough to be a Muslim who lives close to the Arctic Circle, you might have to wait months before you could break your fast and sleep with your wives. So not really applicable there unless you live on the flat earth or are able to last months without sustenance. And so finally we can mark on our graphs that the Quran is not universal in use across time and place. We conclude that the Quran is fallible, not divine, and it is not applicable to all peoples at all times, in all places. It can only be true in the 7th century on a flat earth, where biology works differently and the sun sets into a pool of mud. Oh, and where Moses is the uncle of Jesus. If Muhammad was given a revelation, it wasn't from God. Perhaps a devious demon with a plan to deceive those across the Arabian Peninsula brought it to him. Or maybe it was the result of a medieval farmer turned warmonger, wanting to consolidate power by unifying nomadic tribes under the banner of a new religion. Whatever it is, we can with certainty mark the Quran as a fake, and Islam as an ignorant, false religion. If you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and commenting your thoughts or feedback down below. And if you would bless this channel by subscribing or sharing this video, I would very much appreciate it. Take care, God bless you, and peace be with you.